With the recent collapse of FTX, have you been wondering what Sam Bankman-Fried, the former CEO that was largely being suggested to be responsible for the contributions of its collapse, what's going on in his mind? What is his thoughts? Does he have anything to say for all the actions of everything that's resulted from this? We have an article here, and it's a doozy. There's quite a bit. Strap yourselves in. I will have a link to this article down in the description for you guys. I am not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. Everything I'm sharing is my own opinion. It's my own research. I highly encourage you guys to go do your own research. And with that being said, let's go ahead and dive on into the news. This coming from Vox.com. Sam Bankman-Fried tries to explain himself, the fallen crypto CEO, on what went wrong, why he did what he did, and what lies he told along the way. Last night, Sam Bankman-Fried DM'd me on Twitter. That was surprising. I'd spoken to Bankman-Fried via Zoom earlier in the summer when I was working on a profile of him, so I reached out to him via DM on November 13th after news broke that his cryptocurrency exchange had collapsed, with billions in customer deposits apparently gone. I didn't expect him to respond. Typically, people under investigation by both the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice don't return requests for comment. Bankman-Fried, though, apparently wanted to talk about how FTX and his hedge fund, Alameda Research, had gambled with customer money without, he claims, realizing that's what they were doing. About who gets lauded as a hero and who's the fall guy. About regulators, F regulators. About what he regrets, Chapter 11, the decision to declare bankruptcy. And about what he would have done differently with FTX and Alameda, more careful accounting, plus off-board Alameda from FTX once FTX could live on its own. It was past midnight Bahamas time, where Bankman-Fried is reportedly still located, and we went back and forth on Twitter for more than an hour. He was, he said, still working to try to raise the funding needed to pay back all his depositors. As we messaged, I was trying to make sense of what, behind the PR and the charitable donations and the lobbying, Bankman-Fried actually believes about what's right and what's wrong, and especially the ethics of what he did and the industry he worked in. Looming over our whole conversation was the fact that people who trusted him have lost their savings, and that he's done incalculable damage to everything he proclaimed only a few weeks ago to care about. The grief and pain he has caused is immense, and I came away from our conversation appalled by much of what he said. But if these mistakes haunted him, he largely didn't show it. Disclosure: this August, Bankman-Fried's philanthropic family foundation, Building a Stronger Future, awarded Vox's Future Perfect a grant for a 2023 reporting project. That project is now on pause. On regulators, before his empire collapsed, Bankman-Fried was actively engaged in lobbying in Washington for a regulatory framework for cryptocurrency. While many crypto CEOs, like Bankman-Fried's nemesis Binance CEO Changpeng or CZ Zhao, are openly skeptical of government regulation, Bankman-Fried has largely avoided criticizing regulators, but in our conversation, he dismissed their role. He characterized his past conciliatory statements like when he said just last month that some amount of crypto regulation would be, quote, definitively good, as little more than, quote, PR. In doing so, he all but confirmed the view of critics who have argued that his overtures to Washington were much more about image than substance. And in this conversation, you guys can see here, it looks like a Twitter DM conversation. SBF says, the question was asked first. You said a lot of stuff about how you wanted to make regulations just good ones. Was that pretty much just PR too? He goes on to say, there's no one really out there making sure good things happen and bad things don't. Usually there's only one toggle, do more or do less. Yeah, just PR. F regulators. They make everything worse. They don't protect customers at all. Does seem like some kind of consumer protection would be good though, like maybe regulators can't deliver it, but sure does look like consumers lose their shirts a bunch. He replied saying, agreed on both. It would be good, but regulators can't do it. And you couldn't do it, and CZ sure isn't doing it, so who? Sam responds by saying they can't actually distinguish between good and bad. Just do more business versus do less business, and put up more moats versus put up fewer moats. No one will. But you want to know the truth? No one's doing it in the rest of finance either. Or, for that matter, other areas that are regulated. The FDA isn't helping. The giant crackdown on big tech has no point or goal or philosophy behind it. OFAC is slowly undermining U.S. interests globally and is the single biggest threat to the U.S. being a superpower. ESG has been perverted beyond recognition. I'm sort of putting together a picture where you don't believe anyone is doing anything for good reasons. You don't believe the good guys are good, so why not make it big and then be the one who gets to decide what good is? And if you have to do sketchy stuff along the way, everyone else is doing it too, and plenty of them are worse, and people still like them as long as they win. Is that fair? Sam replied by saying, what we're left with at the end of the day is only the rich can invest. Only they can make or lose money. There's some truth to it, but it's also true that I didn't want to do sketchy stuff. There are huge negative effects from it, and I didn't mean to. Each individual decision seemed fine, and I didn't realize how big their sum was until the end. On being willing to behave unethically. One question on which I've seen widespread speculation is whether Bankman-Fried thought it was okay to do unethical things for the greater good, a position that hardcore utilitarians, which Bankman-Fried has identified as in the past, might hold. That question happens to be one I had asked him in the interview this summer, which I had just re-listened to the night before our Twitter conversation. At the time, of course, I thought the ethical dilemma where Bankman-Fried had perhaps crossed a line was whether it was acceptable to run a cryptocurrency exchange in the first place, and whether the good he claimed he meant to do made it okay. A lot of people, I said to Bankman-Fried in that earlier interview, would think of starting a crypto company to make billions of dollars the way I would think of starting a tobacco company to make billions of dollars, deeply immoral. Presumably, there is some line where you shouldn't do something that bad even for good reasons. I'm curious whether you think there's some line, and if so, where would you draw that line? There is some line, he told me then. The answer can't be there is no line, or else, you could end up doing massively more damage than good. And I think more generally, you could say, okay, fine, but just subtract that out. But I don't think it's that simple either, because there are a lot of complicated but important second order harms that come if your core business is bad for the world in terms of your ability to work with partners and your ability to work with partners in your philanthropic efforts. You could imagine that if the Philip Morris Foundation had really good ideas about how to improve the world, they probably would still have a really hard time working with the Gates Foundation. So I do think it's more complicated than that, and you have to seriously contend with what the impact is of your direct work. I returned to those questions in our Twitter conversation, those well-considered ideas about balancing ethical imperatives. It's not true, not really, he said now. Okay. Goes on in the conversation here. I was just re-listening to that conversation we had this summer about whether you should do unethical crap for the greater good. He said, what did I say? You were like, nah, don't do unethical crap. Like if you're running Philip Morris, no one's going to want to work with you on philanthropy. He replies, heh. And there's a risk of doing more harm than good. But even if you subtract that out, pretty not worth it. He replies, yeah. I was trying to figure out if that was kind of the PR off the cuff answer. His response, man, all the dumb crap I said. It's not true, not really. Yeah, I thought it might not be. He replies, everyone goes around pretending that perception reflects reality. It doesn't. Some of this decade's greatest heroes would never be known, and some of its most beloved people are basically shams. So you kind of don't believe in doing unethical crap as anything other than a judgment we bestow upon the losers? Sam replied saying, a month ago, CZ was a walking example of, quote, don't do unethical crap or your money is worthless. Now he's the hero. Is it because he's virtuous or because he had the bigger balance sheet? And so he won. Well, I can see why you didn't give that answer in interviews. He replies, heh. So the ethics stuff, mostly a front. People will like you if you win and hate you if you lose, and that's how it all really works. Sam replied saying, yeah. I mean, that's not all of it, but it's a lot. The worst quadrant is sketchy plus lose. The best is win plus question mark. Clean plus lose is bad, but not terrible. You're really good at talking about ethics for someone who kind of saw it all as a game with winners and losers. He replies, yeah, I had to be. It's what reputations are made of to some extent. I feel bad for those who get effed by it, by this dumb game we woke Westerners play where we say all the right shibboleths, and so everyone likes us. On bending the truth, Bankman-Fried has maintained that FTX has never invested the deposits of crypto account holders on the exchange. I pressed him on that point via Twitter, and while he continued to insist that FTX did not directly use account money in this way, he said that Alameda, which he also owns, had borrowed far more money from FTX's balance sheet for investments than he had realized. which ultimately left FTX vulnerable to the crypto equivalent of a bank run. Why didn't Bankman-Fried realize what was happening until it was too late? Sometimes life creeps up on you, he said. So continuing on their Twitter conversations, he tweeted out some stuff like, "We never invest your deposits." That was BS, right? SBF said it was factually accurate. Huh? But like their deposits were totally not there. Or do you just mean technically it was Alameda? And Sam says FTX. Correct. So FTX technically wasn't gambling with their money. FTX had just loaned their money to Alameda, who had gambled with their money and lost it. And you didn't realize it was a big deal because you didn't realize how much money it was. Sam says, and also thought Alameda had enough collateral to reasonably cover it. I get how you could have gotten away with it, but I guess that seems sketchy even if you get away with it. And he says, it was never the intention. Sometimes life creeps up on you. On what happened, one theory is that the seeds of FTX's downfall were sown earlier this year when Alameda reportedly took huge losses after the crypto company's Terra Luna's stablecoin collapsed. Bankman-Fried said he didn't realize the extent of the problem because of, quote, messy accounting, albeit messy accounting to the tune of billions of dollars. Was the Alameda thing when Luna crashed the first time customer deposits got lent out? That's what people are saying. Or was it more like the accounting was such that a lot of the stuff you were doing was implicitly backed by customer deposits? And he says, messy accounting, margin exchange, position built up over time, though in retrospect, Luna crash was when a lot of it did. But messy accounting, I didn't realize full size of it until a few weeks ago. If you could do it all over again, would you just take more careful accounting, never touch customer funds, never go into crypto? Sam says, more careful accounting plus offboard Alameda from FTX once FTX could live on its own. Are there people who told you to be more careful? Are there people you would have listened to? He says, it's odd. I mean, maybe, but not really. And those who did, they did on other things, not that. It's odd. Everyone was so worried and concerned about dumb crap we definitely wouldn't do, and that made no sense. Everyone was so worried and concerned about dumb crap I already read that part. But not about whether you were lending out customer funds. Seems like such an obvious thing for them to worry about. His response, yeah, but it's complicated. It wasn't quite lending them out. It was messier and more organic than that. Each step was in isolation, rational, and reasonable. And then when I finally added it all up last week, it wasn't. B, more exchanges did some variant on what we did, just not as big and without the run on the bank, at least recently, and more intentionally. C, everyone wants to be clever, and the clever thing to do is some complicated 3D chess involving customer orders or data or something like that, which makes no actual sense. So there was no point of like, let's lend out customer deposits, just various financial instruments that ended up adding up to that, and you didn't even see they'd added up to that? Sam replied by saying, yeah, like, oh, FTX doesn't have a bank account. I guess people can wire to Alameda to get money on FTX. 3 years later, oh, crap, it looks like people wired $8 billion to Alameda, and oh, God, we basically forgot about the stub account that corresponded to that, and so it was never delivered to FTX. On what he regrets, Bankman-Fried acknowledged that he effed up big multiple times, but he also insisted that much of the trouble could have been avoided if FTX had not declared bankruptcy, which has largely taken financial matters out of his control. During the process, Bankman-Fried was replaced as CEO of FTX by John J. Ray III, a lawyer who helped creditors recover billions of dollars after the bankruptcy of the energy trading firm Enron. The people in charge of the company are trying to burn it all to the ground out of shame, he told me. Bankman-Fried argues he should instead have kept trying to raise more money and insisted that if he'd just done that, withdrawals would be opening up in a month with customers fully whole. The Wall Street Journal reported earlier this week on Bankman-Fried's efforts to find funding and found no indication any investors were committing. Even if fresh funding were obtained, the paper continued, it would require negotiations with FTX creditors and the approval of the bankruptcy court. While he said that some of his colleagues, co-founder Gary Wang and director of engineering Nishad Singh, were scared and, in the case of Singh, ashamed and guilty, Bankman-Fried seems to maintain some emotional distance from the collapse. The world is never so black and white. So Sam goes on to say here, I effed up, big, multiple times. You know what was maybe my biggest single F up? Oh? He replies, the one thing everyone told me to do. Everything would be 70% fixed right now if I hadn't. I'm trying to guess, but I have no idea. And he says chapter 11. Like, should have just wrote it out and kept trying to make the $8 billion back. And Sam says, if I hadn't done that, withdrawals would be opening up in a month with customers fully whole. But instead, I filed, and the people in charge of it are trying to burn it all to the ground out of shame. I might still get there, but after way more collateral damage and only 50-50. I'd take the under on that. Sam says, basically, we get there if both A, either Gary or Nishad comes back. B, we can win a jurisdictional battle versus Delaware. Gary and Nishad are gone? He says, yes, scared, or Gary is scared. Nishad is ashamed and guilty. Ashamed and guilty because all the customer deposits are gone? And Sam says, yeah. People I've talked to have said Nishad was much more into the ethics, not being sketchy stuff than you were. Sam says, yeah, it hit him hard. I mean, it hit all of us hard, but it hit him hard. Seems like you have more of a sense of yourself to fall back on, more of a sense that you are only wrong if you lose. And he was more like, wow, we stole money from people who trusted us. Sam says, the world is never so black and white. On the hack of FTX. Shortly after FTX filed for bankruptcy, watchers of blockchain transactions noticed someone had transferred hundreds of millions of dollars out of the company. I asked Bankman-Fried what was up. Do you know what's actually up with the money that got mysteriously moved out of FTX after the bankruptcy? That's the other thing a lot of people are speculating about. Sam said, hack, either ex-employee or malware on an ex-employee's computer, a few $100 million. On what's next? Bankman-Fried says his number one priority now is to try to raise $8 billion to make account holders whole. That, he told me, is basically all that matters for the rest of my life. All that matters for the rest of my life. But while he said that, quote, a month ago I was one of the world's greatest fundraisers, that $8 billion dwarfs what FTX was able to raise so far, there's no indication any investors would bite. And even if he could secure funding, it would likely require both creditors and the bankruptcy court to get on board. What's next? What's your plan? Sam says, I have 2 weeks to raise $8 billion. That's basically all that matters for the rest of my life. Well, I really hope the depositors get the money back, but I got to say I have no idea how anyone could possibly pull that off from this starting point. Sam said, well, a month ago I was one of the world's greatest fundraisers. Now I'm the fallen wreckage of one. But there's a thing about being fallen. There are people who know what that's like and who want to do for someone else what nobody did for them. This morning, I emailed Bankman-Fried to confirm he had access to his Twitter account and this conversation had been with him. He says, still me, not hacked. We talked last night, he answered. His lawyers did not return a request for comment. Oh my gosh. Wow. What a huge mess. I mean, to see that he's actively engaging in conversation, it's interesting how helpful this is going to be in the end. I'm not quite sure. FTX has made a statement on social media clarifying that Sam is no longer the CEO and he does not speak on behalf of the company. But this was something that came out from what looks like it was last night. And it's quite lengthy. Yeah, so you guys tell me what you think about all this in the comments below. Do you think that Sam is kind of emotionless, that he's a jerk? Does he actually care? Do you think that he's just trying to cover his own ground? Seems to me like, based on other tweets he's done, he's a habitual liar. So looking at this kind of stuff right here, it's him saying that he's trying to actually go out and raise the $8 billion. People are saying that he's online playing video games and stuff. He's playing League of Legends. Is he doing that all day, every day? Probably not. How much of his time is actually being pushed through to try and go and secure this $8 billion? And he says he's got like a 2-week time period. It's a substantial amount of money, and doesn't really come across as if he's taking it that seriously if people are catching you playing video games during that time period. Like, I get it that you're trying to take your mind off and relax just like to a degree, but like there's a 2-week time period that's very critical right now here, and I would be shocked if he pulled it off. It just doesn't look like it. But let me know what you guys think. Tell me in the comments down below. Again, I am not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. Please go do your own research. Thank you so much to my Patreon supporters. A double shout out thank you to WeLoveSafeMoon.com, Victor Vegas, SafeMoon Oz for being higher level patrons. Also, thank you to my YouTube members for your support. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit subscribe, hit the thumbs up, like button. God bless, and we will see you in the next episode.